Let's talk about the Bennedict Mathurin and Buddy Hield pairing. What makes those two work together and what doesn't? And should the Pacers continue pursuing it? Then today, Ryan Blackburn, who covers the Nuggets for Mile High Sports and the Pickaxe World podcast, will join us to preview Pacers Nuggets and talk team building as we do. All coming today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today we are diving into a duo that is starting together and sort of makes sense, but also sort of doesn't. Briefly touched on this on yesterday's show, but Bennedict Mathurin and Buddy Hield, two of the Pacers' best offensive players. What do they do well together? What don't they do well together? Can the Pacers maximize them in a different way? Then Ryan Blackburn is going to join us to talk Pacers Nuggets. He covers the Nuggets for Mile High Sports and the Pickaxe World podcast. We'll dive into Jokic and team building. And spoiler alert, I think the Nuggets have the best team building formula for the Pacers to copy going forward. And we dive into why. You won't want to miss it. It's really interesting. But let's start with a pairing that the Pacers are running quite a bit of recently, somewhat by necessity. And that is Buddy Hield and Bennedict Mathurin. On yesterday's podcast, in the third segment, I talked about the new look Pacers starting five, which has inserted Mathurin for Tyrese Haliburton. Well, Haliburton's been out for the last 5 games. It kind of asked, does this make sense? Should this be changed? Should one of Hield or Mathurin move back to the bench? And I wanted to dive into that duo specifically, give some more context there, because those are the two guys where I think, the kind of the crux of my argument landed yesterday. And it also happens to coincide with some conversations that were had last week after some home games where, Mathurin was on the podium. I want to say after they played Atlanta, and Dustin Dopirak asked him about his chemistry with Buddy Hield because they're playing together a little more. And Mathurin said, he's an alpha and I'm an alpha, right? And they both kind of are. They're both kind of that play finisher, score type guard. That's not a bad thing. Those are good players to have. They have provided a lot of value to the Pacers this year. Mathurin's been the second best rookie in the NBA. Buddy Hield's been one of the best shooters in the NBA. And they're both very good at playing in that way. Then the next day, Dustin followed up with Rick Carlisle and asked about the fit of those two players. And Rick Carlisle said that, pretty early in the season, the Pacers did a detailed study about when both of those guys were on the floor at the same time. And the numbers said then, in the first half, they were not good together. And in the second half, they were basically like elite. And so he said the challenge was, how do they build on that elite stuff to get those guys to fit together? And granted, he noted that this was a very early in the season data study, but they both are talented offensive players. And I think that the fact that they're better in the second half speaks to something the Pacers have been good at all year, and that's sort of adjusting to what a game is throwing at them and finding a good solution to be a better team in the second half than the first half. Carlisle went on to say both do things that are quite different, but called both of them good offensive players who complement each other. And he says, I quote, I like them together because they have to be accounted for defensively by the other team. And that is 100% true, right? Mathurin and Hield can score, can kind of shoot, especially so in Hield's case. And you can't put a weak defender on either of them or you will get burned in some ways, especially so with Mathurin. You need an on-ball guy. With Hield, you need an off-ball guy. They are good players together. But let's talk about their context together right now, when they're not playing without Tyrese Haliburton. Because if you just search for Pacers lineups with both Hield and Mathurin on the court, no other qualifiers, things look pretty good, right? Pacers have outscored opponents. This is 650 minutes, by the way. Pretty significant sample size with these two guys together. Pacers have outscored their opponent by 59 points. They have a 116 offensive rating. That's awesome. They have a 112.7 defensive rating. That's not so awesome, but that's still a plus 3.3 net because, and this is a long enough sample to believe in this, their offense is very good, right? They play well when both of those guys are on the floor together because of, like Carlisle said, they kind of complement each other and they require defensive attention. But it falls apart if you take Tyrese Haliburton out of the equation, right? If you plug it in and say, I want to see Pacers, how they've done with Hield and Mathurin on the court together, but Tyrese Haliburton on the bench. And in 261 minutes, Pacers are minus 25 in those minutes. Their offensive rating is 106. Really, it's 105.96. And their defensive rating is 110.5, close to a minus 4.5 net rating with those two guys out there. So with those two players out there and no Tyrese Haliburton, the Pacers have not been very good this season. And I think that is where the data study goes for me with what the Pacers are doing right now is those two guys are both good. They're both talented offensive players who require defensive attention. And if you require defensive attention, you can score efficiently. In theory, you complement each other. But they also are both kind of better right now as secondary offensive talents than primaries. Haliburton is the primary guy almost all the time he's in. With the second unit, Mathurin is occasionally the primary guy, right? But in general, those two guys are better, especially in Hield's case, finishing plays off of passes or setups and running around screens and, being an elite shooter. And in Mathurin's case, kind of being a breaking down a defense off the bounce after it's cracked kind of guy. He's very rarely like let's throw it to this guy for he's a great isolation player. I do not want to belittle what Bennedict Mathurin is good at, but he's a little bit better of a secondary guy than primary right now. That's not an insult at all. That's a very good skill to have as a rookie. Again, second best rookie in the NBA this year. But both of those things being secondaries is great until you don't have the primary guy to set it all up. And Nembhard, again, has been doing a wonderful job passing in this stretch without Tyrese Haliburton. That's something he's done well. He showed some maturation. He was really good against OKC. He was probably their best player that night, right? They found some solutions, but he isn't the level of primary set up everybody all the time, get to the rim, bend the defense kind of guy to maximize the Hield and Mathurin pairing. So that was a lot of words to say. I do think that Carlisle's right, that the data says they fit together. They figured out how they can be better together. They do have complementary skills, but it also requires a sort of primary glue guy to initiate everything, to get everything organized, to set up situations for them to succeed that they kind of have with McConnell and Nembhard, but not to the extent that they have all season when those groups have been at their best. And if you dive into another stat that I think is interesting here, passing, just raw straight up, how many passes do you throw every game? Pacers are one of the higher volume passing teams in the league, and most players on the Pacers throw about as many passes as they receive in a game. Buddy Hield receives 39.4 passes per game. He throws 40.4, right? Most guys are within one or two on those numbers, except for Haliburton, who passes a ton and receives a ton to the point that his are skewed because it's such a high value difference. And the other guy with a big gap is Bennedict Mathurin, who receives 32 passes a game and throws 24, right? So he is clearly more finisher than creator. So with Hield, you have one less guy who's capable of setting him up with the setup the Pacers have right now, right? When they're starting Haliburton and they're starting Nembhard, they have two guys who can be good passers that make him threatening at all times. It's very rare that someone with the ball can't throw Buddy Hield a good pass. Even Miles Turner is in the top five, on the Pacers in passes made per game, right? They have guys who can get him the ball. Now that's less so the case. And so even with Mathurin in there, who again is a talent, they're both talented play finishers. Nothing I'm saying right now is meant to belittle either skill set of these Pacer guards. What I am saying is this is sort of the conclusion landed on yesterday, but a deeper dive made it even more clear. They need another thing connecting them out there that the Pacers don't have available right now. It's just not possible with the available players they have, especially without Tyrese Haliburton. So even though their net rating with those two guys on the season is pretty good, without Tyrese Haliburton, their connectivity is worse and they aren't as elevating of the lineup they're a part of. And so that makes me think it might make more sense to, even if you start both of them and you stick with that, I think that's okay, but you've got to stagger earlier. You've got to go. I think that what this study showed me is the Pacers need to try more lineups with both McConnell and Nembhard to get those guys maximized. You have two passers, you have more creators, you can make the ball keep moving and kind of play more Pacers-y than you have, or as you have all season, and not be so one lineup and then the other. That's what I think is a good change for the Pacers. If they don't change the starting five, which I said maybe they should yesterday, what I think they should do then is try to get more Nembhard at the 3, McConnell at the 1 kind of lineups. That gives you 2 kind of point guards, 2 attackers, 2 setup men to maximize those guys. And if that doesn't work, then maybe continue to tweak, figure something out. Because, again, those are 2 talented players. They've done great for the Pacers this year, but slight changes need to be made to maximize the team in the situation they're in right now without Tyrese Haliburton. I thought all those numbers were interesting, and I thought everything everybody said, Mathurin, Carlisle, everybody, good questions from Dustin Dopirak. I hope he does a full story on it. We're really fascinating in the context of what the Pacers are right now. Now let's talk Pacers Nuggets. Super fun game. They're battling the 2-time MVP and probably the front runner to be a 3-peat MVP candidate, Nikola Jokic, tonight. Pacers did pretty well against the Nuggets earlier this season. Can they repeat it? Ryan Blackburn's going to join us from Mile High Sports and the Pickaxe and Roll podcast to talk Pacers Nuggets and team building as we do. And this was my favorite team building conversation that I've had with someone else all season, because the Pacers can learn a lot from the Denver Nuggets, I think, in terms of how to build a team around an identity and things of that. You won't want to miss that. Before we dive in to Pacers Nuggets, though, let me talk to you guys about LinkedIn Jobs. A small business owner or a hiring manager, you know that success in 2023 all depends on the team members you surround yourself with. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. With LinkedIn Jobs, you can hire qualified candidates more efficiently by matching open roles with people who have the skills, values, and experiences to help you achieve your goals. LinkedIn Jobs helps you quickly attract qualified candidates to your open jobs with targeting tools. They go beyond resume data and use insights from your job post and your company and insights from the 875 million member profiles on LinkedIn to boost your post in front of the right people and identify the most qualified candidates. And LinkedIn Jobs will connect you with them fast and for free. It's super easy to screen and rate applicants. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We are now joined by Ryan Blackburn for the second season in a row, but now he's over at Mile High Sports and covering the Nuggets for the Pickaxe and Roll podcast, doing it all over in the Mile High City. Ryan, I'm so jealous. You get to cover the 2-time MVP and maybe 3-time MVP. Let's just start there. How good has Jokic been this year? Do you think he'll win a third one in a row? Is there any prayer teams like the Pacers have of slowing him down? Because if I recall, the Pacers actually did okay in the Jokic minutes when they played Denver earlier this season, but got smoked and he was off the floor, which is very unusual.
Very unusual. I remember that game being very topsy-turvy. Pretty early on in the season, you don't really know what's going on, but Denver found a way to pull that one out. It was very close. I remember Tyrese Haliburton crossing up Jokic half to hell and hitting a 3 in his face. That was pretty cool. But then Jokic comes back and hits a crazy shot over Miles Turner. That was awesome too. It's going to be really interesting with Jokic, man. I'm so blessed to be able to cover a guy like him because he always makes it about everybody else. He's interesting. He's unique. There's nobody that's ever really been like him in NBA history, which is a really cool thing to say. He just set the franchise record for assists on Wednesday night against the Minnesota Timberwolves. And that's a big deal because he's only been playing for 8 seasons. Like he's been really good and he's going to keep going. MVP, we'll see what happens. I know that there's some pushback nationally about whether you want to have a guy like him three-peat, but there's also pushback against the pushback. So you never know what's actually going to happen. If Denver finishes as the 1 seed and he's averaging a triple-double, I don't know, man. I don't think anybody's played better than him.
Yeah, I don't know who I would vote for. I think Jokic is probably my vote right now. But I actually said before the season when I did predictions that I thought Giannis would win. Not because I thought Giannis would be the best player, but because I thought Jokic is going to just get the voter fatigue wall this year. Like, it's just how NBA voting has been forever and ever. It's not his fault. But he's been great. Giannis hasn't maintained his early season form, and no one else has. Embiid's been great. Tatum's been great, but no one else has, like, ascended to the point where the voter fatigue, I feel like, will make them overcome Jokic, if that makes any sense. So I feel like he's going to win. And I feel like without Tyrese Haliburton there to push and transition and make the Pacers play out of half court, because their half court offense has stunk without him. Jokic putting the ball in the basket, making the Pacers have to play a little slower. He's going to destroy them. He's just going to tear them apart.
We'll see, man. I'm curious how it's going to go. Miles Turner's actually done a pretty good job over the course of these last couple of matchups, and yet Jokic still does pretty well in general. I think he's leveled up even during this season at attacking various matchups. And the way that Denver's offense is now versus when you guys saw them back in November, I think it's improved. It's different. They were good offensively back then, but they've even since hit just an incredible level. And the defense has been better too around this team. It's going to be hard. I really like Andrew Nembhard. I think he's one of those guys that will probably have a high assist game for Indiana for this next game, but probably a lot of passes to Miles Turner on pick and pops. And they might actually try to guard, if they have Jalen Smith on the court, then Jokic will probably guard him, and they'll probably have Aaron Gordon on Miles Turner just to get out to the perimeter. But it's going to be really fascinating between these two teams. I'm really interested to see how it goes.
It's funny you mentioned that, because thinking back on the draft, I thought Nembhard to Denver in the Braun pick made some sense. Like, I don't know if they just traded Monte Morris, they need another one. Like, hey, this really good passing kid from Gonzaga might be a good fit. Obviously, I don't think the Nuggets regret their choice at all. But I thought that was potentially a spot where he could end up landing before he ended up with the Pacers. The Nuggets have won, I think you told me 18 out of 21 before we started. I don't think they've lost a home game in my life. That's not true, but in a long time, they have not lost in Denver. Do they have any warts right now? And if they do the Pacers have the type of players who can help exploit those warts?
Well, it's been interesting to see them kind of figure some things out at home here, because in the beginning of the season, we caught you guys on the road in the midst of a 4-game road trip. Then 17 of Denver's first 23 games, I think, were on the road. And then it's flipped over the course of these last 22, where 16 out of 22 are at home. And having that kind of schedule has really helped Denver kind of figure some things out, where they've locked in on defense at home. They have the 6th ranked defense in home games, which that you don't really hear that about Denver. You hear that they struggle defensively a lot of the time, but a lot of that was kind of early on. And I think they've rounded into form as one of the best teams in the league, and a pretty well-rounded team at that. If you're going to pick apart a weakness, it's probably the bench still. When any time that Jokic is off the floor, that's the real time where teams have to capitalize. Zeke Naji has been pretty good. Vlatko Cancar has been pretty good. I'm not sure if I would establish a whole bunch of faith in that pairing, in that duo going forward into a playoff setting. But if you're the Pacers, that's the time where you have to really kick it into high gear. Denver's defense is also liable to give up some big runs when Jokic is off the court, because teams will get out in transition on them. And that's probably Denver's biggest weakness. When you get out in transition on Denver, they're generally cooked.
I saw a hypothetical fake tweet yesterday that was like, what if Denver just played Jokic for the first 36 minutes of a game, and then they were up 35 and he just didn't play in the fourth quarter? Would that work? I was like,
that's funny.
I doubt it because of fatigue, but that's a funny way to think about how.
Oh my gosh. He's a great athlete, man. And I don't think people really recognize that because he looks like he's got a head cold most of the time, but he has been so good at keeping his body in shape. And he played that game when he played 65 minutes in a playoff game back in 2019. And he's carried the load for Denver each of these last couple of years. And this year he's been able to play even more because he hasn't had to carry such a heavy load with Murray and Porter back. So it's been really good. He's been awesome. But if there is one weakness for Denver that you can exploit, it's getting out in transition really quickly. I think Indiana does that reasonably well too.
Yeah, the Pacers' strengths do have a good overlap with the Nuggets' weaknesses in terms of their pace, and their bench has been good pretty recently, despite their new starting 5 without Haliburton being atrocious. I did a segment on that yesterday. There'll be one before you come in today. They haven't fit very well, but that makes sense. You know, Haliburton's been their offense. Like, you lose that, you don't just lose Haliburton, you lose the benefit he gives to everybody else. But their bench unit's been good. McConnell just had the game of his life in Milwaukee.
It's awesome. Looking at the box score, that one was hilarious. I think everybody did a double take.
Yeah, his halftime box score was like, this guy's about to have 50 points and hit 8 threes. Like, it didn't maintain at that level, but you know, he's been great. Isaiah Jackson's been playing well. Shea Brissett's been a good piece for them for forever. And so, because of the way they shifted their rotation with Haliburton out, their bench mostly maintained its structure, and it's been pretty good. So they pretty much have to win the non-Jokic minutes, and they can. But I also would be surprised if they change their rotation a little bit. Again, Jalen Smith just got his first did not play coach's decision of the season on Wednesday. So who knows if that'll have any long-term effects. Their starting lineup, like I just said, has been awful. Maybe they changed that a little bit, or sub guys in and out at different times. So we'll see if that can still be a boost for them. But that's where the Pacers kind of have to win this game, because like without Haliburton too, you can't do this. John Wall just did this and got roasted for it. But like, you can't just do like the Turner versus Jokic is a Jokic win, and then this guy versus, you can't do that. But like, if you did do that, I think the Nuggets would win like every single starting 5 man to man potentially.
Yeah, I mean, there's some ones that I think
PCP and Hield would be close.
Yeah. I think it's tough. Like, I think the way that the Pacers have built it around Turner, with going a little bit smaller, putting Aaron Nesmith at the 4 has been pretty interesting. I think it's been pretty helpful for most of the time, right? Like that, like Aaron Nesmith has been pretty good for you guys. I think against Denver, that's going to be pretty hard though, just because Aaron Gordon is a bigger body. They like to use him around the rim a lot. And Michael Porter is also pretty tall. And if you don't have a good contest on him, then he's liable to go off for 20 easy points. So it could be an interesting one. It's why I think you guys probably go back to 2 bigs if I had to guess, but maybe it's different.
Yeah, they went 2 big for a lot of the season. Obviously, they did against Denver the first time, but they did a Jackson Smith pairing for a lot of time over the weekend a few times. I don't know what they'll do, but it seems like they'll almost have to, especially because I have to hand up for the first time on this player. I never thought Aaron Gordon was awesome, right? Never in my life have thought he was the best player. This year, he's probably an all-star or close to it. He never misses. He doesn't miss shots this season. It doesn't make sense. I think the run he had after the Pacers game, he had 12 games in a row over 60 or 70% from the field or something impossible. He made everything. So him leveling up has, one, made me look dumb, and two, made the Nuggets much better. And so that matchup in particular, the Pacers suck with those bigger type of wings, and they have two now, an MPJ and Aaron Gordon, who can give them fits. Even if they do what they did the first time these two teams played and slow Jokic to the extent that any team can actually slow Jokic, in air quotes, if you're watching on YouTube, the other guys will still destroy them. And Jamal Murray is also very good. So I think the Pacers are going to give up a lot of points in this game. I think the only way they can win or keep up in the altitude, which, good Lord, is going to be their bench is awesome and they somehow rediscover their identity with Haliburton and just find a way to play really fast, even with him out. Or else, I don't think they have a chance.
It wouldn't surprise me if Murray struggled a little bit against Nembhard. I thought he did a good job of guarding Murray in that last matchup. That was a pretty fun one. Nembhard's just been very impressive to me, just watching from afar. Somebody who does a whole bunch of little things and plays really hard and has better size than I think people gave him credit for coming out of the draft. I think if the formula against Denver, especially winning is hard at home. Denver's won 15 in a row at home, so it's probably going to be tough. But if you were doing it, lull them to sleep defensively. Just make it so that they feel like, okay, we're good. Allow Denver to score a lot of points early, and then just stay attached because you're shooting the hell out of the ball. That's probably the way to do it, and then take advantage when Jokic does inevitably come off the floor.
Well, the Pacers lost to the Nuggets earlier this season because they lost the non-Jokic minutes. Last year they lost in Denver, and Jokic was suspended for the game. So the non-Jokic minutes have not been the Pacers' forte.
That's wild. That's a very rare thing because Denver's struggled with that so much. So that's one thing that if you're the Pacers this time around, you got to capitalize on that for sure.
One more break here, guys, so I can talk to you about Built Bar. If you're looking for a delicious treat, but don't want all the fat and calories, then you've got to try a Built Bar. We're just making it through the holidays. We're into the new year. And if your goal is to eat healthier this year, like me, that is where Built Bar can come in and help you. You don't have to compromise taste, and Built Bar can help you do that. Healthy and taste together. They're so delicious. You won't think they're good for you, but they are perfect for that New Year's resolution. What makes them so good? Well, for starters, covered in 100% real chocolate. Right. Real chocolate. They come in unbelievable flavors, like my favorite, the peanut butter brownie, as well as coconut almond, churro, brownie batter. There's so many double chocolate, coconut puffs, cookies and cream, and they're all delicious. I don't know how they do it, but they taste like a candy bar while maintaining awesome macros. For example, only 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 17 grams of protein. You don't have to wait to get them anymore. Ordering them off the website, you can now get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. Head to your nearest Walmart today. You can get a 4-box in there. Or if you're close to a Sam's Club, you can get a 13-bar box with some of their hit flavors. You can thank me there. Try Built Bar today. Ryan, something I've been doing with everybody who comes on who covers another team is talking about team building. And the Pacers, for a little bit, were making me look stupid for talking about long-term team building because they were really good this year. 5 games over 500, 2 different times, 5th, 6th in the East, at 4th at one point. Now, without Tyrese Haliburton, welcome back to what everybody kind of expected from the Pacers. 5 straight losses, back to 500, 8th, 9th in the East realm, depending on results between the time we record this and when it posts. But either way, they are not locked into anything with this team outside of probably Mathurin and Haliburton. Either way, you're one of a long-term project. And so what I've been doing, as I told you before we started, is asking other people about team building, how the team you cover was built, what the team did well and poorly along the way, and are those things replicatable, or was there luck involved? Was there a giant cap spike to let you get Kevin Durant for free in the middle of a dynasty already, for example? That is not replicatable, but you get the idea. So as vague or as broad as you want to be, or as specific as you want to be, I get it. Jokic was a 2nd-round pick. That's awesome. But Ryan, what did the Nuggets do well in team building? And is it possible for other teams to replicate?
Yeah, I think you got to really start with the draft. And I think for every smaller mid-market team, it has to start with the draft. If you do not get your draft picks right from the base, then you're not going to get it right. And so having Bennedict Mathurin and Andrew Nembhard already in the building, that's really important. And hopefully Chris Duarte continues to blossom into something like that as well. That can be a long-term piece. What Denver did back when Tim Connolly first took over in 2013. They didn't actually use those draft picks in the first draft. They traded away Rudy Gobert. Didn't really realize that was going to be a thing, but it was a good pick at that time, and that ultimately didn't turn into anything. But the next draft, they drafted Yusuf Nurkic, Gary Harris, and Nikola Jokic in one draft. And what that turned into for Denver was an identity. And they were able to build around kind of the ruggedness of Gary Harris. At least initially, he was the guy that they first wanted to make sure was in the starting lineup. But then they had Nurkic and Jokic, and they kind of picked and choose which of those guys they wanted to go with, and decided to go with Jokic after it became clear that he was going to be the guy. They also drafted Emmanuel Mudiay. They drafted Murray. They drafted Malik Beasley, Juancho Hernan-Gomez, Monte Morris, Vlatko Cancar, Michael Porter, Jared Vanderbilt, Bol, Zeke Naji, RJ Hampton, Bones Highland. That is the
you missed one. You missed one.
Oh, and Christian Brown now.
You missed one again.
Who is it? Who did I miss?
The pick that was supposed to be earmarked for Mr. OG Anunoby, Brian. Who did
oh my God! Well, I'm sorry. I must have glossed over that guy.
I can't blame you for forgetting that pick. Carry on.
Tyler Lydon was the. So they had Donovan Mitchell available, but they already had drafted Gary Harris, Malik Beasley. It was pretty clear that they couldn't and they had Jamal Murray and Emmanuel Mudiay on the team as well. So they had too many young guards. They also had Will Barton, by the way, so who they traded for. It was going to be a pretty difficult thing to add a guy like Donovan Mitchell. They traded down hoping that they could get OG Anunoby at 24. 23, OG Anunoby gets drafted by Toronto, and Denver spent all of that night trying to get up to 22 with Brooklyn and doing everything that they could to trade just an extra asset, an extra pick, try to figure out, okay, what can we do? And Brooklyn stayed where they wanted to and drafted Jared Allen at 22. OG Anunoby goes to Toronto at 23, and Denver stuck with Tyler Lydon at 24, who Tim Connolly had a fetish for tall white shooters. That was probably his archetype that he missed most on in general. But no, it was really interesting to see Denver invest so heavily in the draft. And for a lot of teams, that might have been too many draft picks. Just when you have so many guys like that, you don't know who to play. Because it became really clear from an early age that Jokic, Murray, and Gary Harris were probably the three best of that group, it was good that they fit together. If they didn't fit together, it was going to be hard. And I know that you guys dealt with that with Turner and Sabonis. That's kind of a difficult pairing when you have two very talented players that you're trying to come up and figure out. I know you guys have gone over that ad nauseum. But Denver was able to identify guys that fit well and guys that they wanted to build around character players that could help establish the identity and culture of the team. And then they kind of expanded out from there, where they signed Paul Millsap. They drafted Michael Porter, took a flyer on him. They traded for various guys, like Aaron Gordon is somebody they eventually traded for, but first they traded for Jeremy Grant, who kind of the 3-and-D big wing that you're looking for to put in between a guy like Murray and Jokic. Obviously that worked out pretty well. They got to the Western Conference Finals as a result. Jeremy Grant goes to Detroit. They trade for Aaron Gordon in his place, and that has also turned out well too. In general, I think the most important thing that Denver did was they found a building block, and then they found a second building block, and then they said, okay, we're gonna forget everything about what is supposed to happen, like what you're supposed to get from the center spot, because this is such a unique player. You kind of have to forget everything. You have to tailor everything around how to accentuate that player's strengths and hope that they're a good enough person and good enough leader that it doesn't always have to be about them either. Like they can be the biggest piece of the puzzle, the biggest fish, but they're one of the fish in the pond. And that's probably the most important thing with Jokic specifically that you can probably take with Tyrese Haliburton.
Yeah, it's funny you say all that about identity, especially with nailing it with the first draft of a new regime, because I was just talking with Rylan Stiles, who covers the Thunder, and he kind of said for OKC, yeah, look, OKC's rebuild is probably not a replicatable thing to the extent they did it, but very early on, they were like, okay, Shea's awesome, right? Let's draft guys who fit the identity we have with him. And so it wasn't always about the best player, but it was the best player who fit the way they wanted to play with the core they already had. And it sounds like what you're saying is Denver had kind of had a similar way of building out from, okay, we've got the identity, we've got the guys, let's go that way. And so I feel like the Pacers, who cannot play their identity right now because Haliburton's hurt, but have a clear, like, we are one of the best transition teams in the league. We have one of the best 10 passers in the league. Like, let's go all in on speed and pace and shooting. And they have the guy that makes it possible, right? So now they have the picks. They could have 4 top 32 picks in the upcoming draft, depending on how bad Houston ends up this year. They can't use 4, but you get the idea. They have stuff. They have the identity. They have the young guys. I think they can kind of, they're at base 1 of what Denver did. Granted, Jokic is an MVP level guy. I don't think they have an MVP level guy, but I think that building around an identity is just as important as building around a player or, a timeline or whatever word you want to use to describe other teams have done. And so having the guy early on, I think, is really helpful. Did Denver do anything poorly? We won't talk about Tyler Lydon anymore. That other teams need to avoid, or do you feel like I feel like they've done mostly pretty well, honestly. Like, they've never been starved for depth. They've never been lacking for the second star because Murray's awesome. Like, they've been on a pretty good job the whole way. Just some rough injury timing. But in your eyes, what is the avoidable parts, if any, of the Nuggets build?
Yeah, I think probably the most important thing to think about there is the injury timing in general. I think every Nuggets fan and Nuggets person was really excited about the direction of where the team was going after trading for Aaron Gordon, because he felt like kind of the missing cog in what was going to be a machine where you're awesome offensively, but you need enough versatility and size and athleticism defensively to make it work for Jokic and Murray and Porter and guys like that. And Gordon he represented the best fit there. And so they had what they thought was the final version, and then Murray got hurt. And it's hard to replace one of your top 2 stars. Like, that's always going to be an issue. Right. And it's never going to be easy in that situation. And Denver learned that the hard way over the course of the last 2 playoffs, where they're getting clowned online because they don't have Jamal Murray. Like, that's probably the biggest reason. But I think that the most important thing that Denver still hasn't quite figured out yet is that final piece of, okay, so our identity is Jokic. Our identity is Jokic ball, where you have the 2-man game with Murray, but you also have 2-man games with all of these other guys where he sets up Gordon, he sets up Porter, he sets up KCP. Another great pickup, by the way, kind of a finishing touch kind of pickup, along with Bruce Brown.
Best defensive guard they've had in a while, in the whole Jokic era, maybe.
I think
up there with Gary.
Probably right. Gary slowed down defensively a little bit, so he's like, KCP's been everything and more of what they've asked for. But like, the identity when Jokic is off the court, as we've talked about, what do you want to be? Who do you want to be? How can you replicate what he does without having Jokic, which is obviously really difficult.
Impossible.
They've gone 2 different routes. One of them was try to get a player that's like him. One of them is try to get a player that's completely different and play a different style entirely. Lately, they've been doing the more traditional route without a passing big man. And they've gone with either Zeke Naji rolling to the rim or DeAndre Jordan rolling to the rim and just playing pick and roll, high pick and roll most of the time. But it can get slowed down because those guys aren't infallible. And Jokic does a lot of, I think, raising the tide of all boats with this roster. So when you take him away, it looks a little bit different. I think if you're the Pacers, for example, like, it's a little bit different maybe because Tyrese is more of an on-ball creator, and somebody like Ben Mathurin could definitely continue to develop into a player like that. And he's already showing great signs. So don't get me wrong, but it'll probably be a little bit easier to replicate that style with Mathurin, although Haliburton is a crazy passer, and it's going to just be hard to do that.
Yeah, he's not in the Jokic level of passing, but he is a pretty genius passer. Carlisle's called him a basketball genius, and they are currently seeing, like TJ McConnell has said, yeah, we want to play the same style even when he's out. And I get that they want to. They've practiced it the most. They have quick guards, but like, you can't. He's so good that you can't, right? So it's like, you can't reform everything you do when he checks out of the game. Like, that also isn't possible. So there has to be like this is close, but a little different to figure it out. And, that's almost impossible to do. Like, you can't change if you're not the point guard, or in Denver's case, the center, or the players who benefit from that player doing well. It's impossible to like completely change what you're doing from a possession to possession basis in one game. But you have to find a way to maximize those minutes if you can. If you're a team, it's what your job is.
Most important thing, I think, is to improve your defense as much as possible when your star is off the court, and just make sure, hey, okay, if the offense is going to be bad, at least the defense is going to be good. And Denver still hasn't quite figured that out because, surprisingly, Jokic really anchors their defense pretty well, and nobody's really figured out that. That's probably the biggest issue when he comes off the court is you don't really have that defensive identity. And so maybe when Tyrese comes off the court for Indiana, that as long as Ben Mathurin continues to develop on that end and everybody continue, like maybe they stagger Turner going forward. I don't know what the staggers have been looking like with the team, but if you have enough talent offensively with Tyrese and he can continue to elevate some bench guys, then maybe he's the guy that staggers with the second unit and you try to do some different things. But honestly, if you're doing team building, the most important thing is just to develop that second connection or third connection with Tyrese, because you can mix and match and figure out things beyond that. But the most important thing is making Tyrese's minutes as good as they can possibly be, because if he is going to be your guy, if you believe in him as either the 1 or 1A or just a very high level player, then you want to make his minutes as strong as possible. And then everything else will fall into place just with trades and free agency stuff.
Pacers are good at trades, so I agree with that 100%. And this has been I didn't realize this would end up this way, but this one has been the closest. This is funny because Jokic is the best player on the planet. But like, this has been the closest situation possible for the Pacers to actually replicate, I think, in terms of like a unique style, a good passer, year one of a thing. I didn't think it would be that way. I didn't know what it would be, what team it would be. Then I thought, okay, that's maybe the model that they go with. Like everybody says, do what Memphis did. Yeah, if everybody could do what Memphis did, they would do what Memphis did. It's not possible. They nailed every draft pick for 5 years. Like no one has ever done that. That's not possible. But this one has been, I think, the best blueprint for the Pacers to follow. Looking forward to seeing if they can. Ryan, this game will be fun. Where can people follow you and your coverage of the Nuggets and Pacers Nuggets tonight?
Yeah, so you can follow my coverage at milehighsports.com. I'm at NBA Blackburn on Twitter, as it says on the YouTube screen. Make sure everybody to go check out that. I do the Pickaxe and Roll podcast, which is also on YouTube. I've started doing that. That's been a pretty impressive experience. So hopefully we continue to go that direction. A
lot of people who learned how to talk are now learning how to talk into a bright light that's right in front of their face in the basketball sphere.
I've definitely improved. I've improved so much on that over the course of these last 6 weeks or so. It's been great.
I'm usually good, except for like right now, and my hair's too long. I'm always doing this. I'm like pushing it
my hair's messy too. I need a haircut bad, but it's January and it snowed so hard out here, man. Like I can't get anywhere right now. So is what it is.
Monday, back here on Locked On Pacers, we'll be talking about this game and whatever happens in Phoenix the following night. The last 2 9 p.m. games for the Pacers this season. It is a great weekend to be a Pacers fan. You can now reclaim your sleep schedules for the rest of the year. Thank you all so much for listening. Have a fantastic weekend. We'll see you on Monday.